Hello everyone, I'm Troy Dodds and welcome to the On The Record podcast presented by The Western Weekender. On this podcast, I'm joined by special guests who all have such great stories to tell about Penrith and the role they've played in our city. They are Penrith stories told by Penrith people. Today, my special guest is Fiona Scott. Fiona served as the member for Lindsay from 2013 to 2016. She has a strong background in marketing and business and has dabbled in the media post-politics as well. I really hope you enjoy our chat. Fiona, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Troy.
First question we always ask, where were you born and where did you grow up?
Well, like my father and many people before me, I was born in Nepean Hospital, which is, I guess, about as local as you can get.
Indeed.
My first postal address was RMB 4, Lot 2, Mulgorrow Road, Penrith. Or I think Lot 2, Mulgorrow Road, Regentville, which, we were some of the last couple of blocks on Mulgorrow Road, just before you go down onto the hill that was, rezoned into Glenmore Park, before Glenmore Park was built.
So always been a Penrith girl then?
Yeah, through and through. Now,
what's growing up in Penrith like for you in that time?
Look, I think Penrith has changed a lot over the years. I've got a photo of me when I was young, sitting in a bikini riding a horse. I literally had climbed up a fence to jump on this horse. And my grandmother, she was original farming families from out at Luddenham, multiple generations out that way. And my great-grandfather was one of the last serving aldermen on Mulgoa Council before it got amalgamated into Penrith. And so it was very much a thing, that, riding horses was something that all kids needed to do. Her father, in fact, his job was to grade the Northern Road with his pair of horses. So it was kind of one of those essential skills where you look around today and you think, my goodness, how could you possibly think that a horse was an essential life skill? So, my cousin Melissa and I were, we had to share a horse and we had to learn how to ride it and look after it and do those sorts of things.
Now, of course, you're born into a family that's pretty business orientated. Your dad has been a guest on this podcast as well, John Scott. So at what point did you become aware that, you're in a pretty business sort of oriented world? Because you obviously follow that path as well.
I don't think there's any way we couldn't have known insofar as my grandparents back in 1936 bought some land which now sits opposite the High Street entry of the plaza.
Yep.
And my downstairs was the shop, and then upstairs was my grandparents' unit, and then across from that upstairs there was a courtyard, was where my great-grandmother lived. And my great-grandmother died, a year or so before I was born. And then her home or her little apartment got turned into the office. So we'd be picked up from school and we'd be running around the shop, or we'd be upstairs with all my pop's junk, which, I suppose calling his old stuff, old cars and things junk, but it was junk. And it was the weirdest building in the world. It was so eccentric. There was this tree in the middle of the building and you'd drive through and you'd see this tree. It was mad. Anyway, so school holidays and things, we were always there. The shop was downstairs, we were upstairs, running around doing whatever. My brother's favourite thing was going through all the glove boxes of my pop's cars, or going through whatever junk he had upstairs, and they'd find jumping jacks and just throwing bungers down the I probably shouldn't be talking about this, should I?
And then there's some pretty awesome photos of the shop and everything like that still are around, still do the rounds. It's great that we've got that to be able to look back on as well, a great sort of time in Penrith as well, as Penrith sort of growing in back then, 70s, 80s, kind of starting to really grow and become a city in its own right.
Yeah, well, I mean, absolutely. And so for us as kids growing up in that, we were in the shop all school holidays. We were there, Mum was working in the shop, my grandmother was working in the shop, my uncle was there, so it was always very much a family thing that, you don't know where family starts and the business ends, because the business was started by my grandfather, and it was always all hands on deck. And I don't know whether Dad said it in his, but, he'd get up in the morning and pump petrol and then go to school and come back. And I guess that's the culture you get in a family, that's how you're raised, and you don't necessarily know that other people are raised differently.
Indeed.
Until you get older.
So where do you end up going to school?
So I went to school at Kinderlin, which started by an Aboriginal man called Bill Oates, who amazing Aboriginal man. And kindergarten, believe it or not, was in the old Castlereagh Hall.
Right. Okay.
So the Castlereagh Hall was split in half, with like piles of chairs stacked up in the middle, and kindy first and second was on one side, and 3, 4 and 5 on the other. And one of the little rooms out the front along Castlereagh Road was where Year 6 was, and that was kindergarten. And I think there was 77 kids in the school at that stage. And then that then moved to where the Lakes School is now, which is at the bottom of East Wilchard Road. And at that stage, Kinderlin was the feeder school to St Paul's. So I went from Kinderlin across to St Paul's at Cranebrook, when I got to Year 7.
Well, what's pretty evident in all of that, people talk about Penrith being this sort of cross of city countries, that you very much grew up in rural Penrith. Rural Penrith was it for you.
Absolutely, yeah. No, so I've always seen it in that sort of a way, and, you come into Penrith and how quickly it's changing, and it's mind-blowing.
Indeed. Now, given where you end up a few years later, do you feel like you grew up in a political family? Where does the political interest come from? Was politics a discussion point around the dinner table?
Yes, absolutely it was. Yeah, absolutely it was. And, I mean, my family were always very transparent about the business and the work. And, I suffer from insomnia. I have done my whole life, like my father does. And, I always remember getting out of bed at, for whatever reason, and probably jumping into bed with my parents when I was 6 or 7. And Dad would be working on the computer at 2, 3 o'clock in the morning. He just incredible work ethic. And he would always watch the budgets. And I think going through, the political cycles and the budgets, particularly through, the hyper interest rates, which it's interesting. Yep. We've got some of those dynamics playing out globally at the moment. But the hyper interest rates and the recession we had to have, and, the wage accords and what all of that was going to mean, the bringing in of superannuation. My dad would finish those nights after the treasurer, whichever persuasion, had handed down the budget, and he'd go to his desk and he'd sort of work it out and go, well, this is how many stock turns and this is what it's going to take to be able to make that up, to be able to then increase salaries to cover this or that or whatever entitlement it was that was being introduced at the time. Therefore, we'd have the breakfast meeting, well, not paying myself for 6 months or 3 months, and, you're not getting sneakers now because we can't afford to do it, because, my dad's ethos always was he'd pay the staff first and made sure he was always right up with their entitlements first, and then paid, everybody else successively down there, his bank, contributions and everything else. So the last person to get paid was always our family. So, you're always really aware as to how government and government policy interacted with things when, it was, well, you're not getting sneakers this year. Or, I wore the same school uniform in Year 7 as I did in Year 12. And even when I went from Year 10 to Year 11, and at St Paul's they changed from a junior uniform to a senior uniform, my shirt and scarf were actually a hand-me-down from my cousin Melissa. Yeah. So, they're the sort of decisions that are made when you're in small business. And I don't think that sort of upbringing or dynamic is different to people in small business today. When a treasurer makes comments or an election comes about, or, there's a global event that happens, you want to keep your business afloat. You want to keep hold of your best asset, which is often your people, and they're the interface with your customers and everything else. So how do you keep that alive? And, government does interface with that. And so that really was what introduced me to politics, and being, rather than some kids being really excited about State of Origin, I'd get excited about budget night, which is just crazy. But, I still enjoy those things, and I still enjoy that dynamic of understanding how those things fit. And, from my dad, I developed that really strong interest in economics.
Now, business obviously has a big impact on you because you head to university at what is now called Western Sydney University, but University of Western Sydney at the time, to study a Bachelor of Business. Now, I imagine you could have taken the path of just following in the family business in some ways, but you obviously wanted to refine that skill set. So what was the thinking, or what did you think you wanted out of that at the time to go and do that degree?
Yeah, well, I guess the first thing for me was I actually, I'm going to backtrack a little bit on you, is I actually picked up sticks when I was 19 and jumped on a plane and flew to London.
Right,
and spent 2 years working in London. I worked for a company called Inmarsat, which at the time was a subsidiary of the United Nations, that was the International Maritime Satellite Organisation and is now a publicly listed company on the British Stock Exchange. That was a really amazing experience for me, and it sort of pushed me back into, at the end of that, they were pushing me to go into the accounting line, and I'm not an accountant. But after a couple of years, I just wanted to come home and I wanted to get on with my life. So about 21, 22. And I was just really confused. Like I was just really confused at that age, not knowing what I wanted or where I wanted to go. I wasn't like my brothers. So my oldest brother's a civil engineer, and my middle brother, I'm the youngest in our family, he did commerce law with, econometrics, finance and accounting, and honours in finance and accounting, and just crazy smart. I'm not an accountant like Glenn, so I'm a bit more. I like more the creative fields of things. So I actually came home from that. I actually then went to TAFE. So I went to the Western Sydney Institute of TAFE on Henry Street and did the certificate in marketing. I actually really liked that, and it was actually something I shared with my dad. Again, my mum keeps telling me I'm like my dad, but anyway, and it reminded me also when my dad started Auto One, and, as a kid, he'd take me off to all the advertising meetings with Thomas Marsden, which is another great Penrith business.
Yes, indeed.
And, seeing the jingles being made, and, I actually really loved advertising and marketing because I remember going to those meetings with my dad. So I kind of followed that because it was business, but it was creative. And then I was working in the family business, and then I rolled that into a Bachelor of Business with a major in marketing. And I really enjoyed that, and I did really well in that. And then I took on some advertising and promotions and campaigns with the Auto One group widely, and then got through that. The campaigns I developed just got bigger. So from being our 4 shops, it then became all the shops in Western Sydney that were in the Auto One group. And then I pitched it into all of the Auto One shops in New South Wales. And then I got elected onto the New South Wales marketing and purchasing committees for Auto One. And then my promotions got picked up nationally, and then they got ran by all the Auto One shops in Australia. So I sort of thought, well, maybe this marketing thing, maybe I'm kind of okay at it. So I then rolled the Bachelor of Business, rolled the diploma in marketing into the Bachelor of Business with a major in marketing at Western Sydney University. I did at the same time a certificate in graphic design, which supported doing all of those sorts of campaigns, which meant that after having done all of that through the TAFE system, which was amazing to have been able to gateway into university through TAFE, because it just helped me, and I was able to work the whole way through. I did a sub-major with fine art, so I was up here at the Kingswood campus, doing, photography and painting and all of those sorts of things. So, really, I guess the inspiration for business wasn't just my dad, but it was, it was like Phil Moorhead and, John Bauhoot, and, being exposed to that advertising agency back in the day, and all of those little amazing clips and their books that they brought out, which was awesome.
And this leads you to some pretty other exciting work around Penrith as well, including at Westfield Penrith, which was going through a pretty significant change around the time that you came into the picture. Yeah,
so I left the Auto One after sort of getting into the national role. There's no further I could go with Auto One. So I then went and worked for Yates, and then from Yates was actually headhunted to go to Westfield. So I had this random call out of the blue that they'd had issues with the redevelopment of the centre. So Westfield had been acquired by... the Penrith Plaza had been acquired by Westfield through I guess, challenging circumstances.
Yep.
And the community were less than impressed with the way it had occurred, and there was challenges in relationships between various entities. I don't know how much of this I can,
say as much as you like.
Yeah, without getting defaming people. But so yeah, I got brought into that project, and that was so much fun. And look, I learnt more about politics working for Westfield than I did being in politics. But it was an amazing role. It was an amazing opportunity. It was amazing to see, to understand that, look, Westfield and GPT may have physically owned the asset, but a shopping centre is it's a community beacon. It's a meeting point of the community. And at the end of the day, if those things are going to be successful, then the community has to own it. They have to feel like it is theirs. And, that is the heart of any shopping centre, any location, any of those things. It's probably the same as your paper, Troy. There's times with the newspaper, like, is it owned by somebody or is it really an asset of the community? And I think with this paper in particular, it's being an independent paper, it's an asset of the community. And, there's actually a lot of responsibility in that. And I think it takes... hats off to Westfield to then wanting to bring somebody locally to reconnect the centre with the community. And I think that's a really important role of anything to do with marketing and any business when you are local.
And I guess the success of that, people still call it the Plaza, which means that they must still feel that it's theirs. I guess you would think.
My favourite...
You can try as hard as you like, but no one's calling it Westfield.
my favourite... it's always the Plaza. But my favourite story on all of that, right, was when Westfield had acquired it, and I wasn't there at this stage, the centre closed on a Thursday night. It was like the 30th of June. And, Thursday night, late night shopping, and, the new to be centre manager kind of knocked on the door and said, hand over the keys, get out of here. And the Westfield team then swooped into the centre, and over the course of the night, any Penrith Plaza logo they could find, they ripped it down. Right, they put new signage on every entry, even, and, this dates things, but even the tickets in the ticket booth when you went through the car park were changed to a Westfield ticket. Yeah. And it was that sort of micro detail. And the fact that they couldn't even start till Thursday night shopping had ended, but it was done by when the directors turned up first thing Friday morning. And, in one way you sit there and go, wow, that is impressive. But for the shop holders the next morning and the Penrith community walking in there and went, what the hell? Yeah. But there's one logo they could never remove, and that's at the bottom of the I want to say bollards, the big the things that hold up the building. What do you call them? The big structural columns. There
columns,
we go.
Yes,
columns. There we go. Found it. If you look at the bottom, there is like a steel plate at the bottom, and it's Penrith Plaza in that old sort of Penrith Plaza script with the green background.
Of course, now I think the signage actually says Westfield Penrith Plaza, so they kind of went back to that at some point, or did they stay with it the whole time?
It was always Westfield Penrith Plaza on the outside of the building, but all of the marketing was Westfield Penrith. Yeah.
Now, is politics lurking in the background at this stage? We're in the mid-2000s here.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because we know that in 2010, but when did you first start to seriously say, I might want to have a crack for public office?
Taking the Westfield job was actually significant for me in that I was terrified of politics in my 20s. And I don't think that's an abnormal... look, politics is brutal, it's confronting, it's vicious. I think in a social media environment nowadays, the trolling and behaviour online is just mind-blowing. And it's terrifying. And I think because, the seats here have been marginal for so long, the discourse that can happen can be pretty special, pretty out there. So I was terrified of it. And I was also terrified of it because I'm not an extreme right winger. I'm not an extreme left winger. I'm very much centre of the road, coming from that sort of family business, small business background. And you see the political debate is often, polarised by people to the extreme left or the extreme right, not necessarily people that somewhat sit in the centre. And I guess it took me till I was 30 to sort of understand that the centre is actually a really important position, because that's where the bulk of the population are. And you actually become more of a negotiator that sits in the middle, that can talk to the left or talk to the right and find that consensus point. And so I guess it was, when I was 30, almost 30, I had been friends with Stuart Ayres for many years. We'd been mates through friends and, obviously all growing up in Penrith together. And I said to Stuart, I think I'm interested. I think I'll join.
Yep.
And I sort of thought, well, if I'm going to do this, I need to come back to Penrith to do it. And so when the Westfield opportunity was presented to me, and I had moved out of Penrith, I was living at Breakfast Point and working at Strathfield, I thought, well, okay, this is an opportunity to come back to Penrith, but to come back as me, not as, John Scott's daughter working in Scott's Auto One, and just be that. I'd gone and worked elsewhere. I'd worked in the city, and now, I could build myself. So
did that bother you in some ways about Penrith, that you were known more but previous to coming back? That you were more known, did that play any role in you not wanting to come back at any stage, or wanting to work outside of Penrith more so?
No, I mean, look, I went to the UK because I wanted to be me, and not be defined by my family. And I love my family, and I'm very proud of, what they've achieved, particularly my dad and my grandparents. But I wanted this to be my own identity, and not sort of shadowed by that. And that's not that's not disparaging of them in any way. So Westfield Penrith was an opportunity for me to actually then start to put my toe in the water and to rebuild as me, not just as an entity of my family's business.
Now, how do you come back, you do Westfield, how do you get to be the candidate in 2010? A late comer to the race, if I recall
39 days, 36 days, something like that.
So where is that at? Labor has torn itself apart by now after of course Kevin Rudd's elected in 2007. 2010 election, you go up against David Bradbury. How does first of all the pre-selection process play out for you, and why was it such a short run thing, 39 days?
Couple of reasons. Well, I joined the Liberal Party. I rang Stuart the day after the Liberal Party lost in 2007 and said, okay, ready to join.
Yep.
So joined the Liberal Party then. And then went to some branch meetings and had quite a few people who had also been asking me to run. In fact, I even had some Labor people ask me to run in 2007. And I said no. So I was asked to actually challenge David Bradbury to pre-selection in 2007, but I'm just not Labor. I'm not connected to the union movement. So, that's not me. So I was just really lucky, and I had people who were supporting me instantly to get running. We then, in 2009, we had the pre-selections for Penrith, Londonderry and Mulgoa, which of course Bart Bassett, Stuart Ayres and Tanya Davies won those pre-selections. And, then I had a lot of support for Lindsay and was asked to go and meet with Tony Abbott, and it took about 6 months for that to happen, for, the swatches to align. Interestingly, I met Tony Abbott at the christening of Jackie Kelly's, I think it was her son, at St Nicholas of Myra on High Street, Penrith. And then Tony and I sat at Jackie's house, actually, and, eating frozen McCain pizzas, talking about potentially running for Lindsay. And he said that he'd like to support me to run. That was in 2010, and then I had other people from the party come out and meet with me about that. And we were trying to get the pre-selection up because obviously the state seats had been pre-selected, but then Karen Palazzano fell over with ICAC, which of course caused the Penrith by-election, which elected Stuart Ayres to the New South Wales Parliament. And under the party constitution, whilst there's an election or a by-election, everything else stops, which means the Lindsay pre-selection was paused for that period of time, which locked everything back massively. And then everybody in the party was trying desperately to pull those pieces together because the ricochet of that by-election was quite significant in David Bradbury then going to Julia Gillard about issues and of the time and, you know, Labor pulling on the election and the concerns about Lindsay and all the rest of it, which meant that in the end we had the pre-selection, it got pulled forward, it got cut down in process because the Liberal Party was running against the clock. There was a bunch of seats at the same time that the Liberal Party was a bit short on. And so I was pre-selected on the Tuesday night. Wednesday morning, Tony Abbott turns up with the entire media bus circus and we walk through the Wednesday markets.
I remember that, yes.
And it was, oh my gosh, it was mind-blowing. And then the election was called on the Saturday and then on the Sunday Abbott was out again. So that was literally that was the 2010 election. So it was like 36 or 39 days from beginning to end.
Pretty crazy to be just thrown into campaign mode, like no time to prepare for anything, just straight into campaign mode. The 2010 election, David Bradbury retains the seat. You get a swing to you. So what was the feeling after that 2010 defeat? Was there some positivity that, well, there's been a swing to you in just 36, 39 days, whatever it may be, and that you were really keen to go again 3 years later?
Yep. I took it as a success.
Yeah.
I bounced straight out of it, and I didn't know I was supposed to be sad that I lost. I always thought Lindsay would be a 2-term effort, but I got the timing wrong. I thought it would be... I didn't think Labor would fall apart as quickly as they did in that term. I thought they would take a bit longer. So I thought Lindsay would be, you run in 2013, you win in 2016.
Sure, okay.
The timing I had in my head. And so I had started my own marketing consulting business on the side at this point. So running in 2010 was not career-wise or financially great for me because I was, you know, building my own consulting business. So, but, you know, the opportunity's there. You've just got to run and jump and do your best. So that's what we did or what I did. So I thought it was better than I was expecting. I do play to win. I don't play to lose. And I thought we could win it. So we did play pretty hard. But you know what? I have to say, even at the time, it was I thought politics was full on, but it was way more full on than I'd even given it credit for. And when they say to you, the media bus, you think, that's just a euphemism. And then the media turns up and they're on a bus and there's a bus of them. You're like, holy balls.
Yeah. And I guess this is the thing for you in a seat such as Lindsay, which is going to always get that major attention. That media bus is popping by every week or so.
Oh, yeah, or every couple of days. But then you've got journos. Like I remember there was journos trying to find where we were and trying to spot you on the street or whatever. And I mean... and all of the false narratives that run everywhere. Like, for instance, I remember I'd be at Penrith train station and David Bradbury would be out in the morning at Emu Plains train station and go, here I am at Emu Plains station. Where's Fiona Scott? Missing in action. I'm like, I'm at Penrith train station. Like, what are you talking about? And then the next morning he'd be at Penrith, I'd be at St Mary's. And I'm at Penrith train station. Where's Fiona Scott? Missing in action. I'm like, I'm at St Mary's train station. So he was able to drive this narrative that I was nowhere, which meant it then became like this, where's Wally kind of thing of people trying to find me at places. And, I wasn't hidden, but it's one of those things that when somebody drives a false narrative out there, people will then, start to jump onto it. And I wasn't allowed to have a social media in 2010, so there was no way of combating that narrative.
Pretty remarkable how far we've come re-social media that just didn't want you to have it in 2010, and now you would be absolutely required to have it in 2022 almost.
Well, I mean, so when I was pre-selected again, the first thing I said is, you are not taking social media off me, because you know what? I'm not going to have that happen again where I was going to all the same events even as David, and I was doing more train stations than him. I was doing more door knock. I did I door knocked 30,000 houses before the 2013 election. And I wasn't going to allow that to happen again. I was like, you know what? Every time I'm out, I'm going to post, so you can't say that I'm not doing the work.
Yeah.
Because, you know, and I think that's the hard thing, you know, it's about politics and other things is, you know, not losing the narrative and not allowing somebody else to push
for sure
their thoughts.
Let's talk about the 2013 campaign. Firstly, from the perspective of, you know, often in elections there is that feeling that that change is in the air. You can feel that the change is coming. Did you feel that in 2013? Did you feel at any stage early in the campaign that this is going to be successful? Or was it, you know, closer to the end where you're like, we could win this? What was the general vibe?
I was pretty sure after 2010 we'd win 2013.
Yeah.
And, you know, when Rob Oakeshott went and spoke to Parliament for 18 minutes, you know, and Labor just couldn't hold themselves together. They couldn't, you know, they were paralysed by division, and it just was a never-ending story of it. You know, you had all the Peter Slipper stuff going on. You had all of the Craig Thompson stuff going on, and then, of course, the leadership changes from Gillard back to Rudd. It just was one after another, and, you know, when, you know, senior Labor people started leaving it, and, you know, really decent people, you know, I might be in the Liberal...
Generally the key indicator, isn't it, when clearly people who don't want to serve in opposition for the next 3 or 6 years decide that it might be time to go.
Yeah, and so when you start seeing that, and of course there was, you know, the news poll was pretty, you know, strong, you are aware that change is in the air. The one thing I have to say I found really disappointing in that stage, and it did stick with me, I actually genuinely liked David Bradbury. I think he was a very good member for Lindsay. I think he was a very competent member of Parliament, and, you know, what he's achieved since leaving, you know, Australian political life with the OECD is really remarkable. And in many ways, I look at the economy now, and, you know, he's somebody that you'd probably want in the Australian Parliament right now. You know, it's the disappointing thing about Lindsay is that, you know, when you lose people like that, I don't think that serves the nation best. I mean, there's plenty of people in Parliament that are not the cream of the crop, but, you know, unfortunately, we had a very good MP in David Bradbury. But, you know, I think it's one of those challenges that we would be at events together, and, you know, people would walk up and, you know, they'd he'd be standing next to me or sitting next to me because that's how we were stood for whatever it was. And people would work on him, putting their back to him, I hate that Bradbury, blah, 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 blah. And they just talk nasty stuff. And, you know, I found that, well, obviously you sit there, well, okay, you know, this is community sentiment. But at the same token, it was also, he was always very dignified in those circumstances. And, you know, you sit there and think, well, at some point that's going to be me. And, you know, I don't think he did anything to deserve that treatment and behaviour when people do that. But you see that happening, and I think you can very much see the sentiment in the air. It's, you know, pretty easy to smell the tea leaves in that circumstances. But I think it's also a matter of when that happens, you know, you sit there and you learn from it as well, and thinking, you know, this is the monster.
There's an interesting moment in the 2013 campaign on the 13th of August. That media bus makes its way to Penrith Stadium.
Yeah, yes. I know where you're going.
And I looked at this footage again this morning, actually, on YouTube, and was trying to look at your reaction and try to figure out what you were actually thinking at the time. But yeah, we know what happens. Tony Abbott is speaking about the benefits, I guess, of his female candidates, and mentions that sex appeal is one of them. And such follows that that Tony Abbott has declared Fiona Scott has sex appeal, so vote for her for Lindsay, I guess, is the subtext of all of that. In the moment when he says that, you laugh it off. you can see that in the footage. But what are you thinking at that exact moment?
My instant reaction is, you are in so much trouble. And then it's probably the exact laugh. Like, I just like, you are in so, and I guess it's a nervous reaction that I laughed. Like, yeah, when, like I've had some good injuries in the year in my life. For instance, I had a 17-hand Irish draft horse kick me in the face and break my jaw. I've got a metal jaw. Good local surgeon, the Nepean Hospital, recommend it well. But, yeah, so I'm, having my jaw manipulated on broken jaw and I'm laughing. That's one of my, triggers when I laugh in. I've got that slightly more under control. But so my instant reaction was, I'm like, you are in so much trouble. And he then, I don't know if you see this in the footage, but he actually freezes. He knows he's in trouble too. I then walk across the camera, which shuts down the interview, because he then, if you remember, I think it was Mark Riley, that footage when he was asked about stuff in Canberra, and he's like freezing and he can't communicate. Yeah. He went into that kind of a mode, and we then walked off, and Philip Ruddock was travelling with Tony Abbott at that stage, and Philip Ruddock drove me, oh, how are you, chatting away and whatever, and poor Tony's like, I don't think he meant it to come out that way. I mean, it was a comment that ghosted me, and it ghosted him for all the wrong reasons. I think if a Prime Minister said it now, post Me Too and everything else, I think you would not get elected now. I think that would be taken really poorly. But, it was a very divisive comment. I mean, it was very hurtful to members of my family. They found it really offensive. But other members of my family thought it was funny. So,
what happens behind the scenes? Cameras are gone. Maybe you have some time with them, with one of the media advisors from the Prime Minister's office, or the opposition leader's office at that time. Is there drama happening behind the scenes, or is it kind of just like we sit back and watch this unfold?
I did the smartest thing possible, and I think I can probably attribute this action to none other than the Senator for New South Wales, also known as Maurice Payne. I went door knocking. Just get her out of the office and get out of the office. Yeah. The last place you want to be is in the campaign office. You just want to be away from it. There's other people to handle that sort of stuff. I don't know if it may have been the next day, back at the good old Wednesday markets, and I was there with, I think, Mark Tobin, who was a media advisor from Liberal Party headquarters, and I get this phone call from, so nothing was really actually said to me. It was just go door knocking. just
get away from it.
Just go door knocking. And then I was at the Wednesday markets the next day, and people are having a laugh about it and all the rest of it. And there's, you just keep going. You don't stop. You just keep going. And then I get this phone call from Tony Abbott, and he says, I'm going to text you a number. I want you to call this number. It's Ray Hadley. I want you to talk to Ray Hadley. And you're going to talk to Ray and just talk about, the Panthers announcement of, $22 million for the Western Sydney Community Centre, and, just talk about this and this, and, that's all you need to talk about. Just talk about that. And so I ring Tobis is with me, and I said, Abbott's just rang this. And he's like, did it go through Mark Neame? Nope. He didn't even go through Liberal Party headquarters. Yeah. You need to call Ray Hadley right now. So so we go into that. Is Ross Hutchinson still in that building?
Yeah, he is. Yeah, down at the Paceway there. Yep.
Yeah. So we went into that building where Ross Hutchinson is, and out the back where he's got his offices and stuff. And we stand in there and ring Ray Hadley, and I have it on speaker, and Mark Tobin's with me, and then Hadley asks the question, and I said, I guess it was it was a charming compliment. Tony was trying to be complimentary, and so I wasn't really given any sort of direction on what to say, and that sort of
no dot points on that one.
No, there was no dot points on that one. And then a couple of days later, we then there's then like the full cleanup of it, and so it's an announcement. May have been about CCTV cameras for Penrith, High Street, Penrith, and Queen Street, St Mary's. And it's at St Mary's police station, and there's me, Maurice, Abbott, Michael Keenan, maybe George Brandis. I think maybe George was there. Barry O'Farrell, Mike Gallagher, who was the New South Wales Police Minister, like just overkill cast of thousands. Yeah. And we're upstairs at St Mary's. You know, we've done the walk through, going to do the announcement, and Peter Credlin walks out. Okay, so we're going to walk downstairs because there was like way too many ministers and shadow ministers for everything, you know, and a future Prime Minister and a serving Premier. Okay, I want Fiona, Tony, Barry, Fiona, and Keenan, and Gallagher, whatever.
Yeah.
And Maurice goes, no, you're not going to feed it to the wolves. Like, no, like full press bus. And Maurice and Peter Credlin have a conversation about it, and then and so, you know, it's stuck, and we went downstairs, and we're standing there, you know, in front of the front steps of St Mary's police station, and James Massola, who is one of the Canberra journos in the press gallery, he, you know, you'd had the James Diaz thing where he had fallen over, and Massola says to me, oh, Tony Abbott has his 5-pillar economy. I would like to know from Fiona Scott, what are the 5 pillars? And it's just like, oh, gosh. And so, like, I had asked Liberal Party head office, I'd want every single dot point, and I had learned every single policy. So it didn't matter. They could have asked me the 9 points of productivity, and I knew what the 9 points of productivity. They could have asked me anything. I would have known it. And, you know, Abbott then tries to answer the question, and Massola says, I didn't ask you, Mr. Abbott, I asked Fiona Scott. I said, well, you know, the 5-pillar economy, well, it's very important for Penrith because, you know, education, well, we have the University of Western Sydney. Agriculture, well, we've got 20% of egg production comes from Penrith, and, you know, rattled through, and a local example for every single one of them. And then Abbott grabs me in a bear hug, and he goes, see, she's not just a pretty face. And everyone goes, no! I can't believe he did that. But, you know, so it's, it was fun and games.
In the end, you look back on that comment now, did it I guess haunts maybe not the right word, but did it dog you a bit as your career goes on?
It dogged me in a few ways. Like, it dogged me that I think in a positive and negative way. I think in a positive way, the last few years in Parliament, what we've seen is cultural challenges, and particularly around the treatment of women within Parliament House. And I think having had that comment made me hyper aware of how people could perceive me as a young, single, unmarried woman. So just to not go to the public bar in Canberra, and, you know, I'd get into the office at 6 o'clock in the morning in my active wear, and then I would do a 7-kilometre run around Lake Burley Griffin, and then I would change and have a shower at Parliament House and get myself ready for the day. And then at the end of the day, I would leave Parliament House in my active wear, which means you're not going out to do anything, you know, and you're not participating. So I think it made me hyper vigilant to be super aware of how I could be perceived. And I think that was probably a positive. The negative is that, you know, you're just the little blonde sex appeal piece, you know, and you easily dismissed. And, you know, you have to work harder to overcome that. And I think there's a lot of challenges of women trying to pull themselves up and trying to move into politics. And when you're then trying to also, you know, get over the top of something that can be very profiling of you, which was not even my decision. I mean, I developed a good relationship or friendship with Sarah Hanson-Young when I was down in Parliament, and she's someone I still really value today. And we had this conversation, and to her credit, she's like, I know 2 things about you, Fiona. I know this, and I know sex appeal. And I said to her, well, I didn't ask for that comment. And she just went, you're right. Okay, let's be friends. and I think that's the thing, that, you know, it was profiling in that way, and it did take more to overcome it. It also meant that, you know, people then thought that they could say to me, well, you only got elected because he said that. Well, if it was such an amazing, you know, political strategy, why has no other political leader ever tried that again? Like, it's never been tried again. And so it wasn't some big career strategy. And that sort of dismisses the 30,000 houses that were door knocked, the 3 years of work that went into it. And the 300 volunteers standing out on polling day handing out brochures. I mean, politics is a team sport. You win as a team, you lose as a team. And, and if you choose to play as individuals, then you're guaranteed to lose. So, it's sort of, I think it disses on a lot of people's work and contribution in that space. And I don't believe for a second that Tony Abbott meant to say it. I think it was just a faux pas. We all have them from time to time, and it's just brain fart, but it did have ramifications.
Now, moving on from that, you win the seat in 2013. That election night, first of all, do you remember at what point during the night do you say, this is one, I've got this? And secondly, is there an actual concession call? Does David Bradbury call you?
Yes and yes. So I knew we had won when the first booth came in. My inner geekness is I love demographics, love it. And so, having worked in Penrith for so long, knowing the demographics really well, having worked with Westfield, knowing what mosaic tiling of the demographics and all the rest of it, and having researched the booths going back 7 or 8 elections, I can quickly do the numbers in my head and see yes or no where it was going to go. So the first booth coming in, I knew. David Bradbury did call me, and however, he called somebody else's phone, and that phone was handed to me, and they didn't tell me it was David.
Right.
And they just handed me a phone. Oh, here, you got to take this call. And then David is making a really humble, genuine concession speech. And I didn't even know it was him because nobody had told me. And then it was literally as I was walking into the room, and so there's cameras everywhere and there's people yelling at me, and I couldn't even really hear him. And I feel bad about it because it was probably incredibly disrespectful to him. But I didn't know. I didn't know it was him. And so he's halfway through, and, and I mean, politics had been his life dream, so that would have been a terribly hard call for him to make. And, I probably lacked grace, not necessarily knowing it was him at the time, but he did do that.
Now, what's it like then, I guess in sporting terms, you spend the whole year trying to get to the grand final, but then you're actually there and you've got to win it. So you go through essentially a 3-year campaign to win the seat. You're there then. So what's the transition like to life as the Lindsay MP and adjusting to life in Canberra?
Well, I'm going to carry your sporting terminology on from when the Panthers won the 1991 grand final, and 3/4 of our team then had to go and join the Kangaroo Tour.
Yes,
so it just kept going, you know, and then they were on the Kangaroo Tour, and then they were back in pre-season for the 92 season. So, it was a similar thing. So you get elected, then you've got to staff your office. You've got to get all that up and happening as quickly as possible because, the community have immigration issues. They have child support issues, they have disability issues, they've got issues with Centrelink or whatever the other federal agencies are. And, those things are, I literally need a house tomorrow. I can't get through Centrelink. Oh, I'm sorry, you don't care that you've just got elected. The office is,
of course,
I need you today, So, that's the nature of the job. So you've just got to, you've just got to be able to act straight away. I was really grateful that I pretty much walked straight in with a full complement of staff, which I had sort of collected and curated before then. That I walked in with, have 4 full-time staff at the time. When I walked in with the keys to the office, 2 of my staff walked in with me that day and literally took the computers over from Parliamentary Services. My office manager came in that afternoon. I think that was a Thursday. He started on the Monday. So, and my media advisor dropped in on the Friday, and she started a week later. So within 8 days, I had all my staffing roles placed, which was amazing. I was then put up to do my maiden speech, and that was to be the first day of sitting. So it was the first day of Parliament is all the ceremonial opening of Parliament, and then my maiden speech was to be the second day. I got given like 4 or 5 days notice for that, which is a really significant speech about your life and your family and what you stand for and all the rest of it. I had written quite a lot of it in advance, but, you know, when you're finally under the heat of that, with only 4 days notice, it wasn't enough time to sort of really get my family down to Canberra. Half my family couldn't make it. So we just had to rush that through, which just meant it just kept going, and it was just it just went really fast. And I sort of got to Christmas, and I just couldn't slow down because it was just too much one after another. So on Christmas Eve, I booked myself a flight to Nepal, and on Boxing Day, I flew out to trek to base camp of Everest.
Wow.
But that was literally to try and find equilibrium again, clear the decks, focus my brain, and start, 2014 on an even keel and sort of blow away everything that happened in 2013.
Because the reality is, none of us, but certainly the general public in general, we just never quite understand what it's like. It isn't a 9-to-5 job at all. We know that. It's also not just the time that you're spending there in Parliament House. In terms of the local area, everyone wants you to cut their ribbon. Everyone wants you to attend their function
and eat their cake.
Yep, that's right. Function food becomes your day-to-day diet and whatnot. So it's a pretty challenging role to be in the headspace every single day as well, particularly as a first termer as well.
Yeah, it is a difficult role, and I think the first thing is you have to love the area, you have to love the community, and you have to want to fight for it. You have to believe in it. And I think if you don't believe in it, you can't do that job. The other thing I tried to do as well is to never lose, and I learnt this in marketing, when I was at Westfield, the first thing you do is in the morning we'd cut a lap of the shopping centre, look at the centre, see where everything is, and half pretend to shop the centre. If you're going to understand why sales are the way they are, you need to know what's in the shop windows. You need to know, is that fashion on trend or not? You've got to see it. And they teach you that in marketing, that you should always walk, never come in the back door of a business you work in, walk in the front door and try and take fresh eyes at your business every single day. Don't just sneak in the back and go to your desk. Just walk through the front. And, you might see the cobwebs that are there. Try not to be shop blind. So every morning in Parliament, I would do that 7-kilometre lap around Lake Burley Griffin, and I'd always come back up the main courtyard of Parliament, and I'd look at the flag and I'd look at the building and never lose the awe and respect and what it means to actually then take my community with me to Canberra, and never lose the awe of it, which you see people do lose the awe of it out there. They're like, oh, whatever, and I don't think you should. I think that's when parliamentarians lose their way and their moral compass, is because I think they've lost what it means to, represent your community, to be there, to be that voice, and that it is an incredible honour. It is an incredible privilege. And for me, that moment was something I did every morning, doing that lap, going back up that courtyard, even when it was raining, going through the public entrance, seeing people come through, and that is the centering piece, so that you stay focused and on task.
Now, things are humming along pretty well in Lindsay, but the national situation is not so well in terms of late 2015, when the decision is made by the party that Tony Abbott won't take it to the 2016 election. Can you take us through that? Must have been an extremely difficult decision for you to make too, given that you're on Tony Abbott's ticket, I guess, in terms of getting into Parliament, and he was out here so often, and you'd been so intrinsically linked with him, I guess, to be elected. Tell us what unfolds in the lead up and on the day.
Yeah, look, the actual day itself, like in the lead up to it, Tony Abbott's leadership became terminal when he brought the National Party into the Liberal Party in the party room to discuss the same-sex marriage debate, and didn't hold that vote or that conversation in a way in line with any form of sort of convention of the Liberal Party. That just wasn't there. And then from there on in, the mutterings were everywhere that his leadership was terminal. When it was Tony Abbott against the empty chair, a lot of what people don't remember is that the two gentlemen that signed that that process, who, you know, moved it and seconded it, were both conservatives, you know, hardcore conservatives from the Western Australian division. And, you know, so Tony Abbott was moved on by his own side. Secondly, I wasn't factionally aligned to Tony Abbott. I've always been a moderate. So I've always been in the libertarian side of the party, so the smaller Liberal, which is more the economic side of the party, and that's sort of where I sit. Whenever I heard mutterings, I walked away, and I walked away for a few reasons. Firstly, that experience of standing next to David Bradbury, watching it happen to David. And, you know, I'm like, oh my God, here we go. Shit. So that was sort of where I was at, and I just stayed away from it. So I didn't attend any of those meetings. So whenever you read anything in any book, you'll never see my name that I was at the Peter Hendy house or I was here. I didn't go to any of that stuff. I was asked about it once, and I said, look, I can see that, you know, seats like Higgins and some of the eastern suburbs, which the Liberal Party lost in the 2022 election, that those seats were under pressure, but I didn't feel that I was under pressure here in Penrith with Tony Abbott, and it wasn't a problem for me.
Yep.
And that was the only sort of feedback that I provided. When the day it actually happened, because I had so removed myself from any part of the conversation, I was literally blindsided. Because if it was going to happen, at least I didn't want to be involved. I couldn't be involved, and I couldn't lie to the public that I was involved. I just stayed away from it. And that was conscious doing. And even with my office, my staff, we battened down the hatches, and we didn't go to lunch with people. We had lunch in our office, and we just stayed away from that happening.
Yep.
You know, we couldn't change it, but it was going on. So when it actually happened, I had the people from the local land care group from Penrith here. They were in my office, and there was, you know, a dozen of them, and we had all the maps of the Nepean River talking about Warragamba Dam and all the sort of flood mitigation issues and, you know, blue-green algae and the black willow and everything going up the Nepean River and what we needed to do for the preservation of the river. And so we're in my office with, like, these huge maps of the Nepean River, like literally going through this with the local land care group. And I get this call from Peter Hendy, and it comes through to one of my staff. Oh, Fiona, you know, Peter Hendy's on the phone. It's like, I'm busy. I'm sorry. I don't have time. No. And they, no, you've got to pick up the phone. I was like, okay, fine. Okay, what is it? Malcolm Turnbull has resigned the ministry, and he is literally, as we speak, on his way out to the courtyard to formally challenge Tony Abbott for the leadership. You need to turn your TV on. And I'm like, oh my gosh. So I walk back into my office. I turn on the TV with maps of the Nepean River everywhere and the local land care groups. And we're all watching the events transpire. And that was literally how it happened. And, you know, we finished the meeting and they all sort of said, you know, if there was any place to be in Canberra with our local MP and then watching that all happen and all, you know, happen in front of us.
And is there calls in the next few hours from both camps?
No.
Not at all?
No.
Does that suggest they think that they knew where you stood?
I don't know. I don't think so. I mean, I think the Abbott camp would have always thought I was a moderate because even in the party room, I sat with the moderates. I was always with the moderates, and so they would have assumed I was just a moderate. I don't know. I hadn't made myself readily available one side or the other. I didn't take phone calls. I mean, I had, I didn't take those sorts of phone calls. I had avoided it. You know, people could make any analogy they liked, but I had kept quiet. The only calls that I then made was when the Landcare group left, I had a phone call with all of my staff, and we actually debated it out because I hadn't made my mind up what we were going to do.
Yep.
I didn't know. Because, I mean, I knew it was going on, but I just had avoided it because I just didn't want it to be the truth. Like, I just felt so deeply ashamed because we said we would be different, and here we were doing the same bloody thing. And I was so disappointed. So I rang my staff, and we talked it all out. What do we do? Which way do I go? And what is the pros and cons and whatever? And so we had a long conversation about it. And then I had a call with my family and, you know, synced them all up through my phone and had the same phone call. And both groups of people had the same consensus. And that's the way I voted. And I voted in line with my family values and with what my family said was the right thing to do. My brother Glenn in particular, you know, had a very strong view as to what he thought the best thing for the country was, and we discussed all of that at length. And when the time came to go down to the party room, there's sort of opposite the entry to the party room, Parliament House, there's a stairwell, you know, like you'd see like a fire escape kind of stairwell. And I walked from my office down that stairwell to avoid all the cameras because I was so ashamed that we were doing this. And then we sat down, and I'm sitting there, you know, I was sitting between Maurice Payne and Paul Fletcher, and, you know, you're just looking at two men, you know, two guys who their whole life, you know, this is what their dream, and for one of them this was the end of the road, you know, and I respected both of them, you know. It was one of the most awful things I've ever had to do, and it was just, excuse the language, it was just shit.
Let's fast forward a little.
Yay!
2016. Maybe not so.
Oh, no,
maybe not so, yay.
Yay is yay.
I'm interested in 2016 because I think that there was an expectation that you were going to win the seat. You mentioned earlier that, you know, often, you know, Lindsay would be a two-term, and has been traditionally, obviously held by Labor for a long time, and then by Jackie Kelly for a long time, and David Bradbury for a couple of terms. Life's different for you heading into 2016 as well. You're married by this time, so it's a different kind of feel, I imagine. But where were you feeling? Like, when did you first feel I'm in trouble here? Because, you know, there's often, you know, polls done and internal polling and all of that sort of stuff. But generally, there didn't seem to be a feeling that you were going to lose the seat. But internally, where was it at?
Well, for starters, the biggest issue I had is that there was a benchmark poll done that was hugely inaccurate and really wrong. Probably can say it nowadays. It had me with a primary of 54 and a 2 PP of 60, which meant that I would win the seat on primaries. And these things weren't corrected. When this was presented to me, I went straight up and I said, this isn't right. This can't be right. For instance, I mean, this is probably getting way too technical, but an SA1 is like a postal area, you know, might be a couple of hundred houses in it.
Yeah.
The SA1 of Jordan Springs had a couple of thousand houses in it, but under what the SA1 was, it was only one SA1, where really it should be like 5 or 6 or 7 of them, right? And so with all the growth around Penrith, I didn't believe the mapping mapped right, therefore the demographic sampling was wrong. And so I didn't believe the primary vote. I didn't believe that and asked for it to be checked. No, this is right, blah, 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 blah. So I didn't think that was where it was at. I thought it was a lot tougher than that. That meant that I had a lot of funding decisions and campaign decisions from Liberal Party headquarters were changed because I had a 2 PP of 60.
Yeah.
I had somebody when I said, look, I'm getting smashed, and they said, Fiona, you need to calm down. You need to calm down. You need to relax. You need to calm down. You need to get used to the fact that you're now a safe seat. But then again, you girls get more emotional about these things. And yeah, so
wow.
That was some of they were some of the challenges. And when I had other bits of polling told to me from really reputable sources that I was very well aware of what Labor were going to do exactly and how their campaign was going and what it was going to happen, because there were stakeholders that thought it was important for Lindsay to stay blue whilst the rest of Western Sydney was red. So, you know, there was a lot of support that I was given from far and wide. So I would feed that information back in and, no, that's not true. You remember the benchmark? I'm like, the benchmark is wrong. I'm telling you it's wrong. And they wouldn't believe me. Then it's sort of the first day of the campaign and they're trying to stitch me up with the ABC. And, you know, when, I guess for me, the really crucial moment was when Bill Shorten announced that he was going to launch the Labor campaign at the Jones Sutherland, and then on the Monday night was going to do Four Corners, also from the Jones Sutherland.
Yeah.
I rang. That was actually where that comment, you know, you need to get you relaxed, blah blah blah.
Yeah.
And then I said, Labor wouldn't launch here in Penrith if they didn't think Lindsay was up for grabs. No, that's just because the Riverside Theatre's not available and there's no other theatres in Western Sydney that they can go to. I'm like, that's the biggest load of crap. So I knew we were in trouble then. I knew that was the case. And
that's interesting because I think there's a perception that it was a big surprise to you and others on the night, but you knew from pretty early on that there was a fight on.
I knew from early on, and like in 2013, I knew with the first booth.
Yep.
So the first booth that came in was Stewart Street, which is just off Mulgo Road.
Jamison Town there.
Jamison Town. It's a really small booth, only a couple of hundred votes, but it's demographically neutral, you know, like it's not really left or right wing. It's a fairly neutralish sort of booth. And I just, when that first one came in, I said, we've lost. And Stuart was in the tally room, no, it's fine, you're fine. I'm like, no, it's lost. And I was categorical that I knew. I knew when I got in the car that morning. Like, I just knew. But we fought as hard as we could, and we did what we could at the time. And, it took 2 weeks to work out the result and all the rest of it. But in my heart, I knew then. And
just to that point, chaos on the night, though, in terms of Emma Husser claiming victory, apparently after being told not to by Labor, but yeah, so clearly there was no concession from you on the night either, as there shouldn't have been. It was still a close battle on the evening, even though it was indicating that it would go that way. Yeah,
and as I said, I knew with Stewart. I knew it with Stewart Street. At the moment Stewart Street came in, I knew with that one booth, and like I can't remember the numbers, but like it's 300 votes or something.
Yeah.
Nothing. Like when you're talking, 110,000 voters in an electorate, 300 votes is nothing. But Stewart Street's not, Castlereagh that tends to vote Liberal. It's not St Mary's that tends to vote Labor. It's neither. And it's only 300 votes, but for me it was enough to sit there and go, I can't beat that swing.
Yeah. I'm interested in what happens next from a personal point, because I think politicians can be very easily dehumanised by both the media and the public. There is almost a feeling like they're robots out there, and you win, you lose, see you later, whatever. But from your personal point of view, how did you take that loss?
Badly. Really badly. Look, 2016 was really difficult year. Like 2016 is probably one of the most difficult years of my life, and I don't think I can express that enough. My sister-in-law died of ovarian cancer on the 22nd of January. Got married on the 23rd. Hayley was only 36. My father-in-law went to get his part of the ashes a couple of weeks later. He had a giant heart attack, pitched himself into the hospital at Tamworth. I don't know why I said Singleton. The day he was released from hospital, my mother-in-law was diagnosed with bowel cancer, and by the 31st of March she had died. In that period of time, my husband was a chief of staff to a national security agencies within the Australian Parliament, and we made the decision that he needed to leave that employment so he could spend what time was left with his mother, because, literally cancer diagnosis and she died a couple of weeks later is pretty brutal.
Absolutely.
So there was a lot going on in all of that. And, to be newly married, and I mean, we had to fit our honeymoon between, the wedding and his sister's funeral, and our honeymoon discussing matters of his sister's funeral at our honeymoon. So that was kind of, that was 2016. And so when we then lost on the 2nd of July, it was a multitude of things that just smacked us out which was really difficult. And where do you go to from here? What do you do now? And being I'd worked so hard and I'd missed, I'd said to my grandmother when I got elected, if I get elected, can I borrow, this is my mum's mum, can I borrow my grandfather's war medals? And she just lives at Lake Macquarie, and she said, oh, you just come up to Lake Macquarie, take me out for lunch, and, I won't just loan you the miniatures, you can borrow his real ones.
Yeah.
I never found a day from when I got pre-selected in 2012 to when I lost my seat that I could actually go and see my grandmother for a day. I missed every family event of all sorts of things. And, I used to have this thing that I'd make, cakes for my nieces for their birthdays. Well, that stopped when I got elected because I didn't have time. And, so to reconnect and re-pick up your life and all of those sorts of things is also a difficult challenge. And so we did, you just have to work those things out and then work out where you fit in the world. One of the things we then did was we, obviously being newly married, we did want to start a family. So sort of got as much of that out of our system, tried to work out employment, and we did that and rebuild. One of the biggest factors in rebuilding is Paul Murray. I just will never ever be able to thank that man enough. He's just such a wonderful, wonderful human. And so we rebuilt our income, rebuilt our careers and things. And we went through IVF, 4 rounds of IVF, 16 medical procedures in 14 months, snapped my knee in half in the middle of it, riding stupid horses. And then the sex appeal thing comes back up because, you're doing IVF and you're injecting yourself with high levels of estrogen and progesterone and whatever. And so you put on a huge amount of weight. It's just what it is when you inject yourself with hormones. And, people look how fat you are, you fat, ugly trog. Tony Abbott was wrong when he said you had sex appeal. And you'd have women send stuff to you to say, lay off the pork pies, lay off the Big Macs. It's like, no, I'm not eating Big Macs. It's called IVF. So have fun. Thank you. Thank you for your consideration. So it kind of, you still have all of this negative stuff being thrown at you.
Yeah, it still follows you.
It follows you around. So the next couple of years were really difficult. They were difficult, to try and, rebuild with, my husband's family, with having lost both his mum and his sister, and, rebuild financially. After leaving Parliament, we had substantial debt, paying all that down, and then, trying to start a family, going through IVF, and all the rest of it. So, I guess if I went to ground, I mean, yes, I did Sky and, various other media sources, but I just tried to get on with life.
After those difficult couple of years, is there a moment, is there a point where you do feel like it's in the past, the political life, or do you still sit there on budget night with the popcorn and the and want to return one day?
Well, I don't necessarily sit in with the popcorn because the last few budgets I've been in Parliament House. No, look, I love this country and I love politics and I love the opportunity of it, into the future. I mean, if the stars align to go back into Parliament, I would be interested. It has to be the right opportunity and the right place. I think Melissa McIntosh is doing a great job here. I'm not in any way looking to topple her at all. But, whether that's what I do at the moment in a supporting capacity, whether it's in a different role, whether it's from the media, I think it's I think it's an important contribution that you can make to the country.
And do you think, as far as what you want to do in the future is concerned, if it's not in politics, do you feel, I guess, that it defines you? Does it define you? Do you still, when you see people now, you're the former member for Lindsay, that's, is it hard to recapture what you had before that, I guess?
I think so, but I think the hard thing is if I went back to corporate marketing now, I mean, you've got to think, I haven't done corporate marketing, so to speak, since, 2010. In the last 12 years, I mean, Facebook only really became massive, 2007, 2008.
Yep,
so,
yep.
2010, it was, you'd put sort of text posts on, but now you've got TikTok and all this other stuff, in a post-COVID environment where people work from home and it's, the way these online tools work and, the mechanisms. I mean, you even think from the paper itself, back in 2010 when you had the paper with high wide and, all of these other different mechanics, I mean, as to what the paper is now or any of these things. So, I think in a career specific, particularly as dynamic as something like marketing that does change so much of those period of times, I think it'd be very difficult to pick up exactly a marketing career. I do enjoy the battle of ideas and the contest of ideas. I mean, for instance, having gone through IVF, I think there's huge areas of the public debate that I want to see changed.
Yep.
For instance, I think things like that should be paid for by Medicare. I believe that, we need to explain to young women about the truth of their biology, that, when you are most fertile, when things actually work. I think there's a lot of conversation at the moment around, gender and sex and, what it means to be a man or a woman or, any of, how people identify. I think they're important conversations, but so is the actual biology. I mean, after 4 rounds of IVF, I know pretty well that there's no way I can get my husband pregnant. Yeah. I don't have the right biology for that. But then I also know that having started the process, having gone through my career and everything, we started at probably a more challenging age, So I think there's a lot that, we need to have these conversations about. And when you look at Roe versus Wade that came up in the United States and how, the abortion laws went there, I mean, there's a lot for women to contribute to political life, but also the narrative of what that means. And I was having a conversation with somebody today and we were talking about this exact point. And his comment was, like if you were, if you had a child at 24, you'd be an outcast because, nobody has children at 24. And I thought, hey, hang on a minute. You live in the eastern suburbs. It's completely in the reverse at Penrith. Like if I had a child now, I'd be like the same age as grandmothers. So, you've got to have these conversations and narratives. And I think that's still a really important thing. And I find that to be important. And I think when you look at a place like Western Sydney that's growing and it's so dynamic and you've got so many different cultures coming in here, the ability to advocate for that area, but then also have those conversations that are not just, not just railroaded by the eastern suburbs. I mean, I guess I got the bug again about politics. I'm going to blame Carly Tink for this, the new member for North Sydney, when she got me so angry. I was listening to her debate on Sky and she started talking about congestion taxes. And I got so mad about it. I mean, who does she think runs the hospitals in North Sydney? Where's the nurses come from? Where do the teachers come from? Where's the hospitality staff? Where's the cleaning staff? Where is a whole range of other white and blue collar workers and tradies that work in North Sydney? What, she wants to charge taxes to everybody living in Western Sydney to come and actually run her area? Or she just wants to put congestion taxes on it so none of us can go work in the city and, ring fence the city? And it's things like that where you sit there and go, I want to change that. And, I think that, it does, whether that is in as a representative or through the ability of driving conversation, driving narrative, working through the media, working through other forms, like as in op-eds and podcasts and other things. I think there's a really important role for Western Sydney right now to really step up and say, look, we believe in climate change. We understand that we've had 50-degree days. We've seen our river flood. We've had all of this stuff. We get it. We understand. But we need to have solutions that are equitable for all of our country, and we need to have that type of a voice that we're part of that narrative as well. And I don't know, that still gets me hot under the collar, that I just want to see that equity across our whole region.
I think you can tell that you're still pretty enthusiastic about advocating for change, advocating for, I guess, a better future for everyone as well. And it's interesting, those things like you mentioned about IVF, and we don't talk about those things enough, and the conversations aren't had enough, even from a societal viewpoint of, I became a dad 18 months ago.
Yeah,
so
congratulations.
But later though, so I was 37, 38 at the time. The 10 years before that, the constant, are you having kids soon? Are you having kids today? And nobody knows what's going on behind the scenes and in the backgrounds of people, and the amount of people that do have trouble in that regard. So we clearly need to have more conversation about it, because it's not a societal norm. The societal norm is to ask you those questions.
Yeah, it is. And I think it is a matter of having those communications. I mean, I remember sitting in the IVF clinic, and you have blood tests, and they're 6 o'clock in the morning, and everyone's sort of like hiding under their newspaper because nobody's going to see me in here because I'm so shameful. I think we need to have those conversations. We need to be honest about it, and it's not shameful. And it's there's a lot of conversations that also flow from that about sperm donation, egg donation, and all the other different procedures, and how those things are legislated, and what options. I mean, if housing prices and cost of living is where it is, and they just keep growing in capital cities like Sydney and even out here in Penrith, then it forces people to have children later. But our fertility is, particularly for women, is at the highest in your early 20s. But how can you afford a house and everything else and have children at that stage? So you end up in your 30s, and before you know it, you're then sitting in an IVF clinic. So I think if there was an ability for, eggs to be frozen earlier, for women to have more choices, and that then feeds into ranges of childcare and various other things. But these are the whole of society conversations we need to have, men and women, and and it's more than just talking about, gender as to how you identify. And I think, I don't think those conversations actually are mutually exclusive. I think they need to happen all together. I don't think you can just talk about how you identify without talking about what your biology is and what your biology means, because, how some of that conversation extrapolates will maybe affect how some of those processes within your own body work, and choices you might choose to make 10 years later, 15 years later. And, I just hope, young people have all of that knowledge, that they're, when they're making some of these choices, that they have all the knowledge and all the choices in front of them, that they, those opportunities are all there for them.
What is pretty clear is that there is still much to come from Fiona Scott. The last question, the question we always ask, even though there is much more to come, how would Fiona Scott like to be remembered? Somebody who cares, and a nice person. I think, somebody who tried to make other people's lives better. Indeed. Thank you very much for joining us. Great chat. Thank you. And I hope you enjoyed our chat. On the Record is produced by The Western Weekender. To hear future episodes or past episodes, search Western Weekender wherever you listen to podcasts, and make sure you hit subscribe. Check out westernweekender.com.au, and we will see you next time.